The comparison with LinkedIn is a good one. Like I've never heard that comparison before, but Twitter does what LinkedIn set out to do. I think that's a very true statement, because LinkedIn is sort of like
networking, you mean, right?
Yeah, in terms of networking.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
Like, because that's what LinkedIn is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a place where you go on and you meet people who are in your industry and you contact them and blah 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 blah. Now it's more of like just an online resume. Like that's really what LinkedIn is.
Yeah,
then,
definitely. Yeah.
Like just a piece of paper that just says, here's what I did, as opposed to Twitter is like, that's the place you go and meet the people in the industry, you talk to them, and I think Twitter is superior for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Yeah. And LinkedIn has kind of devolved, and there's a bunch of Twitter accounts that show some of the worst excesses of LinkedIn and the kind of self-promotion side of things. And Twitter is obviously bad for that sometimes. Yeah, Twitter is obviously occasionally bad for that, and people are obviously out for self-promotion, but it's not nearly as bad. And people are far more approachable. So it really is what LinkedIn meant to be. But
just one more person telling me to get on it.
Yeah, you really should. I'm telling you. That's how I get literally every podcast guest. I'm just like, hey.
I mean, to be fair, that's how I got a lot of my guests. I think all right, I guess my question is this, right? And maybe one of you guys can explain it to me. Imagine that you just started on Twitter. What do you do?
I would just the way the algorithm works is you gotta tweet about the things that you want to be involved in. So you gotta start tweeting about Android, and then inevitably people who also are tweeting about Android will start showing up on your feed, and over time you're gonna see things that you'll be like, oh, that guy said a good thing, I agree with that thing about Android, and then you end up following that person, and it goes from there. It just snowballs from that point.
So I have to take part in the conversation.
Yeah, otherwise you
just enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, you're just gonna see porn and shit. Otherwise,
I mean, all I see now is like people talking about JS and web development. So yeah, I guess that's because I tweet nothing. So all right, maybe I'll just start tweeting stuff and I'll see what happens.
Twitter's trying to throw shit at the wall right now.
Yeah, it's like which one
sticks. Yeah,
and I probably like one of them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I do think Twitter has quite a slow sort of up ramp kind of process. There's quite a lot of fairly esoteric knowledge that you're kind of hit with when you join Twitter. What on earth is a hashtag? Like how, where do these trends come from? What's a quote, retweet, and stuff like that. And it is one of those things. It does kind of snowball, definitely. I think the more time you invest in it, once you get to a certain, I don't want to say number of followers, but once you follow a certain number of people and you're involved in a certain number of conversations, it's phenomenally rewarding. But I think it takes a little bit of investment, and whether that's worth your time or not is entirely up to you.
I mean, I'm willing to give it a go, just so that if I don't enjoy it, I can finally tell Mitch it's just not for me. Because
that's not going to happen.
Right now, I haven't got an excuse.
What a joke. That's not going to happen. The only thing that's going to happen is you coming on here one day with a revelation and saying, wow, Mitch,
God, Twitter is awesome.
You were right.
I'll be wearing the t-shirt.
Yeah. So I didn't introduce our guest. This is Adam Bennett. He is the self-proclaimed lead Android wrangler at I don't remember the company that you work at.
It's Cuvva.
Cuvva, right? How did I meet Adam? How do I know Adam? Twitter, of course. And I like a lot of Adam's tweets. I don't know if I actually physically press the like button, but I know that in my head, every time I see them, I almost always am like, yeah. I don't know. That's how I got to know him. He says things that are sometimes provocative, sometimes just correct, and sometimes actually more or less usually provocative, I would say. Like, you tried this thing and this thing didn't do what you thought it should do, and now you're gonna tell the world about it. But it's usually quite correct. Like, I have a lot of the same experiences you do. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Why don't you tell us about yourself? What you're a lead Android wrangler. What does that mean?
So I am the lead Android wrangler / engineer at Cuvva. We are a fintech and we sell car insurance by the hour, basically. So if you want to borrow a buddy's car, you can do that. We can insure you from anywhere between 1 hour and a day on our kind of short-term product. And we're just starting rolling out our sort of long-term insurance product where you get to pay monthly rather than one giant yearly sum.
That's cool product.
Yeah, it's definitely solving a real problem that I think the company basically started because the CEO Freddie, he used to run something like a chefing school or something in Scotland, and he wanted he'd like run out of ingredients, and then he'd be like, oh, could one of you guys go and head down to the shops and pick something up for me? But there was no way to insure them, so and that's kind of how it came about. Yeah, there's not really anyone else offering that kind of solution. So there's definitely a product market fit there, I think. So,
yeah, I can think of one example right off the top of my head right now. It's a problem that I personally have, like right now, today. My wife, we just got a new car, and we have the old car. It's uninsured, but we want to sell it. So like, okay, I have to go get a day permit every time some guy wants to come and drive the car. And I don't know if they're going to buy it or not. So I have to, and it's expensive to get a day permit.
Yeah.
So
I was literally about to say the same thing, because I'm also trying to sell my car because I got a new one, and it's this exact same thing. Every time someone wants to test drive it, you have to pay for a day.
Yeah, you're almost better off just leaving it insured, because
it works out cheaper. It would have been cheaper if I had just left it insured than keep reinsuring it for every now and again.
So how many times did you have to reinsure it before you sold it?
I still haven't sold it.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, so it's getting expensive.
How many times have you reinsured it at this point?
I think this so far it's 3 times that I've reinsured it, but because my car insurance, like this one, is tied to my regular one, and my regular one's coming up for renewal, I now can't reinsure it until I renew or switch insurers, because there's no option for me to do it. It just says you have to wait until your quote comes through. So I'm kind of stuck now. So I like, as soon as you start saying that, I'm literally going to Google Cuvva when we're done, and I think.
Oh yeah, you guys are both from that part of the world.
Yeah.
I can tell by the accent. Yeah, so
it always gives it away.
So how close are you guys to each other?
Whereabouts are you?
Well, I'm in Southeast London, so I don't know.
Where in Southeast London?
Rotherhithe.
Okay, I'm not familiar. I'm in Hertfordshire, probably.
Okay.
Originally from Southeast London, but more Essex way, if you didn't know from the accent.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So anybody not from Essex or from the UK, we're probably just saying random words, but
so you guys are like within hours driving distance of each other, probably.
Probably like I would say within an hour and a half, I reckon. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
So now you can use this product. Look at that, Rob. You've gained so much knowledge already on this podcast. Yeah. Some evidence of why you should start using Twitter. Like a great product that's going to help you sell your car or cheaper.
If I had tweeted, how do I get an hour's car insurance, me and Adam would have probably met already.
Yeah,
but,
could have. Yeah,
possibly. Yeah, it's quite possible. Yeah.
So maybe if I tweeted, how do I get? Yeah, if I tweeted, how do I get an hour's car insurance, and I'm using an Android device, and maybe some other like Android related hashtags, we would have.
Yeah, you'd be in the right pipeline.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
All right, I'm seeing that works.
So how did you get into this this role that you're in now? Because we were just talking before we started the podcast. You said you have 6 years of Android experience, which I think is quite crazy for a senior, but we'll talk more about that. So how did you get there?
Yeah, it's a good question. Did you want from like 0.0 or
let's go from 0.0. Because I'm actually personally curious how the ascension went to you're a lead, like you're not just a senior, you're a lead now. You're leading the whole engineering department, I'm assuming, or something like that, or the Android department anyway, I'm assuming. In 6 years, I think that's quite a fast ascension, considering like me, myself, I have about, you could say, like I said, about 5 years experience, but not really 5, because I've done other things. I've done some web stuff. So I wouldn't say like, 5 every day, all day, but I'd say probably 4 for sure. And just the thought of being like leading a company's Android engineering department at this point, I would say, I could probably do it, but I don't know. I would definitely need some help.
That's the other question. No, fair enough. Well, so I started off actually as an intern at a company called FlyPay. So I'm an entirely self-taught Android developer. I should probably point that out. And at a certain point, I got confident enough to apply for a couple of roles. And I think I sent out 3 CVs, and I got 2 nothings and 1 interview. And yeah, it was not a bad success rate, really.
It's quite high, I'd say.
Yeah, it was definitely too early for me to be applying for engineering roles, I think. But I did this sort of coding challenge type thing, and I didn't exactly pass it. But the CTO, he obviously saw some potential in me, and he offered me an internship. And at the time, I was working in retail. Ironically enough, I was working for Apple retail. So there's quite a change of career for you. Yeah, and I kind of jumped at the chance to take it. And then 6 weeks later, they gave me a permanent contract. And yeah, I think I ended up staying at FlyPay for nearly 2 years, not quite 2 years, I think.
So what was that first interview like? You said you failed it. I'm assuming like you failed it, but he gave you the job. Is what it sounded like to me.
Yeah, pretty much. It was definitely the strangest interview process that I've ever done, because basically you know how the kind of Google sort of brain teaser questions,
the ones that don't make any sense, and like you're like, what? Okay.
Yeah, basically we had it was a bunch of questions like that, and it was all on a sheet of paper, I think, and there was one programming question in there which involved a loop written in Java which had some errors in it, and it was about how could you make this faster, or what, what's wrong here, and ultimately I think it was missing like a break or something like that. But at the time I didn't spot that, but I did very well on all the other brain teaser bits, and I think because of that, the CTO, a chap named Chris, he kind of gave me a shot. So and I am forever grateful for him for that.
You send him a dividend every month, or?
No, no, I don't think I need to. He lives in the Bahamas now, so
okay, he's good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's doing okay. But yeah, so but FlyPay, we had it was quite a learning experience, really, because we had quite a large team. Ultimately, I think at the biggest point we had 6 Android engineers, but we maintained sort of 8 different white label apps, plus our own app, plus a framework that united all of them. And for a very junior engineer, that's quite a hefty thing to work on.
Yeah.
There was a lead engineer there called Matt Karen, who I learned a tremendous amount from. There's a chap called Bart, who I learned a lot from as well. It was really like a real formative experience for me.
So at FlyPay, you said you maintained all these different sort of app states, I guess you would say. So was it just Android, or was it like also the web stuff that you worked on? What about the Apple department? Was there like different department for that, or was it just Android?
Yeah, different departments. Yeah, so we had a dedicated web team and a dedicated iOS team, and there really wasn't very much crossover between us. Ultimately, I think there was initially. We had this crazy idea where basically, so we made payment apps for restaurants, and the idea was that a restaurant could provide a JSON file with all the configuration in it that they wanted for theming the app. So all the colors, all the text, text styles and that kind of thing. And the intention was that they could share that between iOS and Android. And that was really the only kind of shared piece of logic that we had for the most part. Other than that, we were pretty separate. So.
And that worked out? Like you gave the client the ability to design their own app, and that worked out? Like that, there was no issues with that?
I mean, it worked from a technical standpoint, but
I assume they had a tool to do that, right? There wasn't just like get out Notepad and write a JSON file.
I honestly don't remember. I actually think it might well have been generate it yourself, or here's an example.
Oh, fill in some
that
makes more sense. That makes more sense.
Yeah. But no, in the end, we got rid of it because ultimately, pretty much every company, when originally the idea was, when you white label an app, you basically change, the colors and the text styles and that kind of thing. But pretty much every company wanted something a lot more custom than that, and then we ended up doing a lot more custom solution for them, which turned out to be quite a big time sink, and maintaining these different different apps. So they had shared logic, but the UIs are all totally different and all the rest of it. And it was a lot. So yeah, it didn't really work out. So
did you use flavors for that, I assume, or was that too early for flavors?
No, well, so we did investigate flavors. Yeah, there wasn't enough in common between the apps to use it, unfortunately.
Okay.
So it's completely separate.
Wow. Okay.
And yeah, it meant we also didn't have a mono repo set up at the time. So we had one very hefty Jenkins job, which would you push something to the framework and it would build all 8 apps and check that you haven't broken anything and stuff like that. So it's pretty mega.
Yeah, maintaining. You said that maintaining the apps afterwards. Like when I think about freelancing, that's probably the thing that most strongly keeps me away from it, I guess, is like the thought of having to maintain the things that you build. I don't know. It just like, how do you even build for that? Like, do I even want to do that? It's just, that sounds like zero fun.
Yeah, it definitely puts me off. I don't know if I would go that route because of that, for certain. And also, inevitably, in the kind of freelance world, you're maintaining somebody else's work, which you don't know quite as intimately. And I wouldn't go for that again. No. So I'm enjoying having the completely opposite experience in my current role. So
the full-time job role.
Full-time and a ton of building things from scratch and greenfield, which is
that's fun.
So, yeah, it is really good fun. Yeah.
So you said in your interview process that you did quite well on these sort of like brain teaser things. What did you? But you didn't do so well in the programming. So that makes me think that you didn't do programming in school, which you said you're a self-taught. So what did you go to school at all? Did you take any university, college?
Well, so I did a year of a traditional engineering degree. So it was actually renewable energy, which encapsulated electrical and electronic engineering, a lot of maths, fluid thermodynamics, a bit of chemistry, a bit of like management kind of things. But I ended up dropping out after a year because it really wasn't the thing that I wanted to do. At the time, I really hated the kind of mathematical side of things. I was always very good at maths, but absolutely hated it. So I ended up dropping out after a year, and I ended up attempting to pursue a career in music instead. So it was a real kind of 180. Ironically, now if I could go back in time, I would probably enjoy doing the math side of things again. But I'm a lot older and wiser now. So
you said you're good at math. So what was this sort of like engineering math? So what was it, like applied math, I guess, like fluids and thermodynamics, I guess, and things like that? You didn't enjoy that?
No, not really. No, at the time I really didn't enjoy it. But these days I think so. When I left FlyPay, I ended up working for Blockchain, which is a cryptocurrency company. And there was a tremendous amount of maths involved in that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
A lot of cryptography and stuff, and it really piqued the cryptography side of it really piqued my interest. Now it's a different thing. Reading books about discrete math and stuff like that for fun is a bit of a sea change from sort of 18-year-old me. But at the time I didn't enjoy it, but now I think it's really interesting, and if I went back in time, I'd probably do that again. So
I actually have like kind of a similar experience. I did a lot of math in university also, but I didn't love it. Like I would never have picked up like a math book and just been like, oh cool, let's like look at some problems. It was just like I was good at it, so I was like, that's just what I did, and it was Now, like I haven't done any math in quite a few years because I've been programming. I haven't touched any sort of physics problems or math problems, and every once in a while, I wake up and I'm like, I just really want to I get like this urge to like look at a math book and like just go through problems. It's kind of a strange feeling. So I think I don't know. There's something to that, like because you seem to have the same experience. You get like this urge to like go and like just look at some random math problems. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah. I think it's partly because of the industry that we work in. We spend so much time trying to get to the root cause of problems and trying to get to that kind of root level of understanding. And at the end of the day, computer science is basically applied physics. Physics is basically applied maths. It's it's kind of the route that predicts how everything works, and it's I think it's very close to us as programmers, even if we don't realize it. So I think it makes quite a lot of sense that if you're into the computer science side of things, I think moving to maths is not a particularly big leap now. So
right, makes sense. So your next job, you said you built some kind of a blockchain app, or you worked like what was that all about? And also, how did you get there? How did you go from your FlyPay? I think you said
FlyPay, yeah.
How did you go to the blockchain job?
Yeah, sure. So that is a good question. Basically, FlyPay, I really enjoyed the culture. I really enjoyed the mentoring. I think I kind of reached a point where I wanted to take a step further. I wanted to be kind of recognized as a bit more of the kind of mid-level engineer that I was at the time, I guess, and that includes salary-wise as well. It tends to be the main motivator that people leave.
So you're saying you got, because you started at that job, you sort of got stuck in the role. I think that's what you're saying. You maybe wanted more money, you wanted more responsibility, but you were still kind of just in that role, and you thought the only way to go up would be to switch jobs.
Pretty much, yeah. And there was, at the time as well with that company, with FlyPay, we had a bit of a pivot more towards kind of back end services anyway. So it was clear to me that the apps were going to get a lot less attention, and I just wasn't very interested in that. So, yeah, and so blockchain. Funnily enough, I'd heard about cryptocurrency a long time ago, way back when I was in university. So that's like 2009. It's very, very early days of crypto. I even tried mining cryptocurrency for about a day, but I was not computer savvy enough to know what I was doing. So I have no idea whether I actually mined any or not. And sadly, that laptop's been destroyed, so I'll never find out.
Oh, no.
But
so you could be a millionaire and not know it.
Yeah, I could. Could have my own island, but no.
You could be in the Bahamas with the old CEO of
yes, exactly.
FlyPay.
But no. So it was something that I was kind of, I'd heard a little bit about, and I kind of understood the basics, and I thought it was quite interesting. And so I had the job post sort of pinned on a Chrome tab for about 6 weeks, and I was just getting to the point where I was like, I think I'm going to apply. And then, funnily enough, they reached out to me, and one of the recruiters there.
Randomly or what?
Yeah, completely randomly. Yeah, it was like it felt pretty serendipitous, really. Someone from the hiring team there reached out to me and was like, trying to pitch blockchain. And I was like, I'm already interested. I think this is a really interesting field. Basically. So, and then I did a whole bunch of interviews there. There was one other Android engineer, and I remember bonding in the interview process because he had also pursued a career in music as an audio engineer, which is what I did. So we got chatting about that. And then they ended up hiring me. I guess the rest is history, as they say. But
what was that interview like?
Long and intense. So I think I had sort of 4 separate rounds with 7 different people, I believe. So it was I was interviewed by, obviously, like the first screening with HR. I did a kind of not quite a pair programming thing, but I kind of showed the other Android engineer around the code base that I've been working on, or at least the gist of it. And talking about my experiences and things, I chatted with the co-founder, chatted with the CTO, the CEO, the head of engineering, and probably someone else as well. I'm forgetting. So
how many were on that team that you worked on, or at that company? Like, how many Android engineers were on that team?
How many Android engineers? We had, I think, at our largest, we were 3. Okay. So it was pretty small, and I think that was why. So that was when I first got promoted to a lead engineer position, and it was pretty manageable at that point because it's just looking after the 2 other guys, and then that was.
So did you go in? Did you go in as a lead, or did you go?
No. So I if I remember correctly, I was hired as a mid-level engineer, and then I think I was promoted to a senior about 9 months after that, I believe. and then a lead engineer maybe another 9 months after that.
So
I
you
think.
kind of went through the stages, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. So
I wanted to ask, how did you I guess now, but I suppose it applies then, is how did you find the lead role differed from just being, senior engineer?
Yeah, it's obviously a real change in responsibility. You're the kind of touch point for anything that involves Android. But ultimately, you're responsible for your team's happiness and their productivity. And you're also responsible for, potentially 50% of the company's revenue. So there's quite a lot of responsibility there. I think you do a lot less coding day to day, so you have to be okay with that. Equally, I think when people are in their product teams, naturally a lot of the kind of housekeeping work kind of falls on you. So you have to be okay with tackling some of the most rubbish jobs as well, and doing a lot of kind of clearing the way for other people. And like I said, because you're responsible for other people's productivity, that is something that you're kind of happy to do. So yeah, it's very, very different. There's still, I think at this point, I've got about 1.5 years worth of tech lead experience. But I mean, there's still just a huge amount to learn, and I think we at Cuvva, we want to expand the team, so we've got 4. So there's myself and 3 other guys on the team. We've got another one starting next month, and then we're hiring another 2 at least next year. So the team will quite rapidly become really rather large, much larger than I was ever expecting to manage. And that in itself, I think, as the team gets bigger and bigger, you're coding less, and you're responsible for more people and more. The thing that's really interesting about a lead engineer role, I think, is the feedback loop is much longer. So the great thing about being an engineer is you can build something and it either works or it doesn't. You test pass or they don't. You get a green light or a red light, whatever. And you can kind of instantly kind of gain the satisfaction from that. But as a kind of technical lead, you're making decisions that are much longer in scope, and you don't know whether they're correct until much later down the line. And you're managing people, and the feedback loop for managing people can be really rather long as well. If you're kind of gently trying to course correct people, it might take months and months before you kind of see what the results are. If you are doing things like defining the team culture, you won't know whether it scales until you scale, and at that point it might be too difficult to fix it. So it's super challenging. I'm enjoying it a lot, but it's just very, very different from a senior role, or say like a staff or principal engineer role.
So it's a lot more soft skills too, I'm sure, right? Like you gotta, you're the leader. You gotta show how people are to behave to each other, how they are gonna work together. Plus, then you're the guy who has to make the choice. I'm guessing, by the way, you're the guy who is who's the last sort of line of defense for a bad choice, a bad or a good choice.
Yeah. Also, certainly, it's my responsibility if it goes horribly wrong. So. It's funny because if you went down the pure management track and ended up as an engineering manager, then it's almost entirely soft skills. But with a tech lead position, you can't really get away from the fact that you've got to have quite a good balance of both, and it's really tricky to kind of maintain those technical skills whilst you're coding less and less. And so that personally for me, that leads me to do a fair bit more outside of work than I would necessarily want to do. But keeping on top of the changes, keeping on top of what everyone's thinking, and the kind of, obviously we have a lot of discussions within the team, and my team are really, really good at kind of discussing the kind of technical trade-offs and decisions that we're making and stuff like that. Which is great, and I'm really, really lucky in that respect. But yeah, it's quite challenging.
How do you stay up to date on all of the Android things? Because there's a lot of them. How do you and then also, like, how do you? Well, answer that question first.
Okay,
and then I'll get to my next one.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, historically, pretty early on in my career, I kind of carved out. Basically, I found out that Android Weekly existed, and way back when it was really the only kind of Android newsletter, and I thought it was a great resource. And it comes out on Sunday night, so it made sense to me that a Monday morning I would gently ease myself into the week by reading up on everything that was in the previous issue. And that's worked really, really well for me. I tend to carve out still typically that Monday morning, or at least sometime during the week, to catch up on what other people are thinking, what other people are saying within the industry. A lot of it is incredibly useful. And that for me has been a great way to stay on top of things. That more recently as well, Twitter has obviously been super useful. There's a lot of people who are really on the kind of cutting edge. So just trying to sell Twitter again. They're kind of really on the cutting edge, and they're exploring.
It makes
things.
sense.
And they're talking about their findings, and digging into what those people are doing is really valuable. And then there's a couple of Slack groups as well where maybe every couple of days I'll just skim through some of the discussions, and particularly like the Kotlin channel. That one is very good. There's a lot of people who are messing around with Compose and trying to do things that other people have never done before because it's completely brand new. And just by skimming through some of the answers from people like Lena Richardson, people on the Kotlin team, obviously people at Google, you can gain quite a lot of insight on stuff which isn't really documented anywhere. It just kind of exists just there. So that's worked really well for me, really, really well. So
yeah, it sounds efficient what you're doing, because you're kind of you're using other people to kind of process a bunch of information, and then you're reading the highlights and figuring out what rabbit holes are worth going down, because there's definitely too many rabbit holes to go down on your own. You really using other people's experiences are for sure a good way to do it. I remember I said this to Nate Abel, I think his last name's Abel, when I did a podcast with him, because he asked me, he said, how do you keep up with all of the Android things? And I'm like, I said, keep your awareness high so you can kind of like see it all, but don't go, I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was something about keep your awareness high and something else low and like specific. Like you look at it all, but you only go down the ones that seem like the other people have said this is worth going down.
Yeah, so it's like the T-shaped skills thing, right? Where you have broad skills but one narrow area of focus. And I think that kind of resonates with me, because I think when I try to keep up on everything, and then the things that I find super interesting, for instance, Jetpack Compose, I will dig into a lot more. And if someone has if someone has like a specific idea which just catches my attention, then I might make like a proof of concept or just mess around with it at the weekend or that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then if I think it's interesting, I'll write about it and kind of share that with other people, and that's worked really well. But yeah, I guess it's that kind of T-shaped skill type thing you can kind of apply to your own learning. It's Android right now, there's so much going on, and there's so much historical knowledge to know that you couldn't possibly go deep on everything. I don't think it's really possible. No. I think people these days, personally, I'm seeing a bit of a trend towards specialization within Android, which is quite interesting. I think it speaks to just how broad a topic it is. But you've got people who are very UI focused, people who are very architecture focused, people who are, everyone's kind of got their own interests, their own specialty. Security people, for instance, so I think that's quite good advice.
Yeah, my next question was actually going to be, how do you so when you've decided on a rabbit hole to go down, what does that look like for you? Like, say you've just discovered Compose, you're like, hey, this is pretty cool, I like this. What is the next step for you to like dig deeper?
Yeah, definitely. So typically it's going to be if there's any sample projects or that kind of thing to check out, that's great. Sometimes they don't exist in any kind of formal capacity yet. You might have to dig into like the AOSP code base or something like that. And like, cs.android.com has been really, really good for searching for specific
cs.android.com.
Yeah, if you don't use it, it's a phenomenal tool for searching.
Heard of it.
It's a really good search system for all of AOSP, all of Android Studio, that kind of thing. And it's quite regularly a reference for me now. If I'm looking for specific classes or things around, if you just search for Compose, it will dig up everything that's in the Android.
That's literally what I did.
Yeah, there you go. So and you'll find samples and the documentation in there is pretty good as well.
So how would I look for a Compose sample? I just typed in Compose. What am I looking for?
I mean, if you literally search for Compose, I think Compose and then @sample. I think there's an @sample tag, which will there's quite a few comments in there which link to specific samples, which you can then find.
Okay. I did @sample. That didn't work, but I did Compose sample, and I got a bunch. It looks like.
Yeah. So that's quite a good way of finding bits and pieces. So yeah, I mean that's worked for me. But basically just when I'm kind of interested in one specific area, I'll just try and absorb as much information as I can. And the open source nature of Android makes it really easy to dig into things. I'll dig through. I think the search function on GitHub is kind of underrated. If you're looking for,
use that. That's my go-to for sure.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, if you're if you're struggling to, one of the things I use it for a lot recently is we're migrating a lot of our Gradle scripts to Gradle Kotlin. And if I can't figure out how to do something, I can search for a specific string with the extension .kts, and then someone else might have done it. So I tend to do that, reading as many articles as I can from other people who've explored it or that kind of thing. And asking questions in like Kotlin lang and stuff like that. So
what about when you got to get your team on board with something? How do you sell it to them? How do you sell it to the company?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's actually something I'm talking about in about a week's time. Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'm really lucky in my team in that we're pretty much all on the same page, and I think nothing tends to be a hard sell. And I think it's partly because we've got some pretty clearly defined sort of values that we kind of adhere to. And one of them is that we never do anything which slows down our velocity long term. So we're happy to take small hits now for something which we think will improve our velocity later. And so something like Compose was a really easy sell, because there might be an initial hit where we have to migrate our design system, but the speed at which we can create new screens, not having to write view holder boilerplate and stuff like that, in theory that will pay dividends, and then that is quite an easy sell to management as well, and we've just kind of built that into our workflow. So we're quite good at discussing in the team stuff that we found which we think might work for us, and then we are quite good at running little experiments. We're quite good at measuring these experiments as well, and having some kind of internal dashboard for tracking whether this has worked or not. And then
Firebase for that?
We typically use Google Sheets. We have a Google Sheet doc, and we use GitHub Actions, and something, I think there's an action called G-Sheet Pusher or something like that. And then we write quite a few bash scripts which will look for specific things or measure something or what have you. And then we use that to track progress. So for instance, we've got a weekly task which tracks the number of public composable functions. And so that roughly correlates with the way we thought about Compose is Compose replaces custom views, which we have a ton of, styles, themes. So every public composable function is one of those three things, basically, or kind of represents one of those three things. So we can track the number of styles, we can track the number of layouts, we can track the number of custom views versus the number of public composable functions, and then we can kind of see that progress long term. And it really it means, if management are curious about, you guys haven't shipped a feature in a couple of weeks, what have you guys been up to? We can just point at this graph and say, here it is. Here's some refactoring that we've been doing, and long term we think it's going to pay off because of this reason.
Right.
And that's worked really well for us as well. So yeah, it's a mixture of we have a lot of discussions in the team. If we think it's a good idea, or if some people think it's a good idea, we will do some kind of proof of concept or some kind of small scale test, and then after that we'll kind of track the progress on refactoring as well if we think it's wise. Yeah, and that seems to have worked really well so far. So we'll see how that scales with a bigger team. But
I'm a little confused about how you that metric tracking system that you just described. So you write Bash scripts that run on your internal company network, and they look
it runs on GitHub Actions.
Runs on GitHub Actions. Okay.
Yeah, so they're just cron jobs. Yeah.
And these this searches all of GitHub for compose functions and things, or just your
just on our code base.
Right.
Yeah. So we can do things like track progress of refactoring, for instance. Yeah.
And how does that how is that a metric that you can use to tell management that you're making progress? I'm a little confused.
Well, it gives us some figures to point to. So, for instance, one of the other ones we've done as well is sort of Java versus Kotlin in the code base. And if you sell that to management as basically legacy code versus new code, which is roughly equivalent to, then it's quite an easy way to say, like, maybe we didn't ship a feature in the last couple of weeks, but here's some clear progress. We've knocked 10% of the Java framework away, kind of thing.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it's just about having something that is kind of surfaceable and measurable.
Right.
And we're big fans in the company of we have what we call an SAT, a show and tell on a Friday, and every team kind of shows the cool things that they've been working on. And quite often for us, it's like, here's some cool new feature which customers are going to see. But sometimes it's like, look, we've made a ton of progress. We've just killed this piece of legacy stuff. Here's like this measurable outcome. And it's a really effective way of showing, we are actually doing something. And here's a measurable output of that. And as long as you've had that initial buy-in where you've kind of said, by doing this, it will decrease build times, or it will increase the speed at which we can iterate, or stuff like that. Then it gives you that output.
So I guess to kind of summarize what you said about how do you sell things to people who are not programmers in management or whatever, it's metrics are important. Something to point to, some kind of metric that says I'm actually doing something, and this is actually going to produce an outcome is very important.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
Yeah, basically just have to find a way to abstract whatever you're doing away from coding, right? That's it. Like a number or a graph or something like that.
Pretty much, yeah. It's far simpler to kind of compare a graph than to explain, why this might have this effect because of these technical reasons.
We won't get null pointers anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And one of the things we've been thinking about a lot is removing capped, because we are pretty certain that by removing data binding and capped from our modules, it should increase our build times pretty dramatically. But that's a reasonably difficult thing to explain to upper management or a PM or that kind of thing. So measure it. Gradle profile, chuck that information in the graph, and it's a far easier sell. So
cool. Yeah, Compose is very interesting to me too. I think that is definitely the future of UI development for Android for sure. I don't know if you spend any time on Flutter, but like
I have not. No.
Building UIs with Flutter is a very pleasurable experience. It is nothing like native Android UIs. Everything works together. It's easy to make animations. There's one dependency. It's like I would say, it feels like I'm painting, like I'm making a drawing. It's like artistically pleasurable to do, as opposed to when I'm building things on Android, it's always, oh, that didn't work. Oh, that's right. There's this weird rule with this thing. I can't do that. And it's like always things doesn't work. So Compose, I think, is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. I've been playing with it a bit myself, and I especially like it. I like how they're approaching the integration of it into current code bases. So like you can like use the on create view function and spit out a composable from that. So your fragments layouts, you can very easily just remove the layout, put in the composed layout, and so it's great. It's going to be good for legacy systems because you can just replace the layout as opposed to having to rewrite everything.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think it's pretty clear to me. I think looking at the work that Google have done on Compose, I think I would guess that they learned a lot about the reason that Kotlin has become so successful and so popular in Android. And one of the reasons that Groovy never did or Scala never did was the interop wasn't very good. And Compose has very, very good interop in both directions.
That's the word
that Kotlin does. Yeah. And I think that is a pretty killer feature. They've clearly thought about it. I was just doing some interop stuff myself today, and it's really, really very easy. So they've clearly thought about it, and I would guess they did some reflection and thought this is why Kotlin was successful, and we have to offer the same thing, because nobody wants to, rewriting an entire screen from scratch is quite daunting. But being able to inflate a composable inside an existing layout, that's great. So
yeah. So you think the next sort of big thing for Android is going to be Compose, probably the next big shift?
I think it's fair. I mean, for the reason I've been talking about it so much for a long time now, I think it's fair to say that it will kind of completely change how we approach all kinds of things on Android, not just the UI, but because we're moving all of the state out of the UI, it's going to affect how we architect things. It's going to affect how we think about writing Android in general. Doing things like being able to abstract away fragments, like you said, being able to abstract away navigation just into these composable functions. It's really going to change a lot of the most painful points of Android. And it's going to be super interesting to see what much smarter people than I come up with. So
I'm hoping like secretly that they don't just like do what they've done and abstract it so you can put a composable inside of a fragment. I'm hoping that they abstract away the fragment completely, and you
totally can. And
only have the composables have like view models that can be like scoped to like a hierarchy of composables. So basically get rid of the life cycle. Get rid of the life cycle. Get out of here.
Views and logic.
That is a sticking point right now. I think that there is a slight sticking point, which is that I think at the moment it's not possible to inject a view model scope to a composable.
I literally asked that question to everybody. I tagged like 6 people. I went to the GitHub samples and I looked at all the people working on the Google samples for Compose. I tagged like 6 of them in this tweet, and I was like, "Hey, can you like?" I asked that exact question, and then they were like, "No, but this is a feature request, so hopefully it happens."
I mean, there's some very smart people working on it, and I think when the 1.0 alpha came out, I think Sean McQuillan, he wrote a long thread about a lot of the samples that they'd done and a lot of the stuff that they built and how they tried to get this working but couldn't, but realized it's obviously quite an important feature. If there's a ticket on the Buganizer to track, I would love to know about it, because it's
apparently
it's
it is.
I
don't know if maybe he did link it to me. Let me see. Anyway, I'll look after the podcast, because if he did link it, I'll be able to find it and I'll give it to you, because that's kind of like, for me, that's like, that means the life cycle goes away, or life cycle is no longer a problem. So like that's what I'm after. That solves so many headaches. Like
definitely. We can definitely end up in a world where we have single activity, and obviously you still have to deal with a life cycle there, but the life cycle of the composables is what you actually care about, and that's it's far easier to manage. So
my next question, I guess, is about design and architecture. How much I know you said you don't write like a ton of code now since you're a lead, but like as you were ascending, I guess you could say, how much time did you spend on like UI? How much time did you spend on architecture? Did you spend an even amount of time on both? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, that is a good question.
Also, how much time do you think someone should spend on each one of those?
Well, I mean, to answer that one, I think it's really up to you. I think, like I said, I think people were kind of specializing more and more in Android because there's just so much to learn. For me, I mean, traditionally I always found those kind of more pure architectural stuff the most interesting, because you have the most control over it. So that has traditionally been the thing I'm kind of most interested in, and that probably stems from from working at FlyPay and having this giant SDK which we had to architect and then fit in with other apps, and so that kind of put me in a good stead there. Most recently at Cuvva, we were given the opportunity to spend about 6 months refactoring the app, which is kind of unheard of. Basically, the company was aware that the code base had kind of reached a bit of a kind of critical mass, and we were very, very slow in iterating. And because of that, we were given quite a lot of time to purely focus on architecture, and it was really, really good fun. And we thought a lot about, what's the presentation layer architecture we want? How does that fit in with stuff which is coming down the pipeline? How future-proof do we think this is? How testable is it? What are the primitives that we're going to build this on top of, and that kind of thing. Yeah, and that's been super interesting, and I've always found that to be the most interesting aspect of programming, I think. So it's been kind of refreshing to do a bit more UI work recently because of the great UI toolkit migration, but definitely been more of an architecture person historically.
I'm a fan of architecture myself. Also, I'm a shit UI designer. I am really terrible, and it reflects the amount of time that I've spent on it. Very, very little. I don't know why. I always thought, like, every time I go to build a UI, I'm just like, I just don't care. I want it to look good enough, and it also seems like a exercise in futility, sort of. Because there's always like new, and then here, of course, here you have Compose coming out. It just seems like there's so many new UI things that are always coming out. It always just seems like, why am I should just get this good enough and then move along because something new is coming. I don't know. That's just how I always felt with the UI stuff anyway.
Yeah, I think there's an argument for that. I think one of the things that put me off for a long time was styling and theming, which has always been a bit more opaque than it should be. So I've never been a real fan of kind of organizing your styles across various different API versions with attributes that may or may not be there and may or may not have the Android namespace or the app namespace, or there's quite a lot of gotchas there, and I never particularly enjoyed that side of things. So yeah, I feel you on that one. So
I'm still trying to work out. Sorry, Mitch, I was going to say I'm still trying to work out how to theme between day and night mode, because that still ends up throwing a whole bunch of errors for me. Like
in Compose, it's very simple.
It is.
Oh, really? Okay.
Simple.
Okay. Yeah. Trying to do an XML is horrible. So
yeah, to be fair, it's not too bad now. But I say this as the person who didn't implement it. I watched someone else implement it, so I'm sure he had an absolute mare of a time. But it's far simpler in Compose. But
as the team lead, after somebody spends hours and hours trying to do something, and he comes up to you and shows you a 5-minute presentation on how it's now working. Looks easy.
That's easy.
Yeah, but deep down, I know it was probably intensely painful. But
usually is.
Yep.
So actually, I just remembered, actually, as you were talking about architecture, I think one of the way that I ended up following you on Twitter is you were talking about MVI architecture.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm almost certain that's why. Now that I think about it, I remember you tweeted about MVI, and then I tweeted back. I'm like, yeah, MVI, that's the way. And so tell us about MVI. I'm assuming your opinion hasn't changed in the last few months. Why is it your architecture of choice?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of benefits to it, and I think it's clear it's clear if you look at sort of how, for instance, how web operates now, Redux and that kind of thing. That's clearly the architecture war on web, right? So it kind of makes sense to me that in this kind of reactive environment, which is UIs, that having this kind of unidirectional data loop, that makes a ton of sense to me. And I think just the benefit with MVI is you have to explicitly model every possible input, every possible output, every state change. And it makes you think an awful lot about what those inputs and outputs are going to be, and is it possible to get into an invalid input, and how do I validate this input, and that kind of thing. And I think that is really the winner for me, is that it just forces you to think a little bit more because you're explicitly modeling all of these changes. There's a lot of different approaches to MVI, and I think that the one that we've taken is quite verbose, deliberately verbose, I would say. So it's kind of easy to
get lost in it.
Kind of easy. Well, yeah, but it's also extremely explicit about what's responsible for what. So there's really no confusion there. And when you view someone else's work, it's really obvious where the data is going to be processed, where the side effects happen, where the navigation happens, that kind of thing. And we found that really beneficial. But yeah, because you can segment it into these individual bits, there's inputs, processes, side effects, outputs. It makes it incredibly testable as well, and each component is testable in isolation, and that's obviously a massive win as well. So yeah, for a lot of reasons, I think it just makes sense in a reactive UI, and something that has to react to a user input. That unidirectional data loop is just makes logical sense to me, I think. So
yeah, I completely agree. I think it is, if there's any architecture that is just perfect, that's the one for like Android. It's like exactly. You model out an event, that event trickles down the line. You know exactly what, especially with clean architecture, like you have a use case, it fires off the use case does what it's supposed to do. Then it has a set of outputs that are possible, whether that's a failure response, a success response, a variation of whatever code you want to throw back to the UI. It's an isolated one-way street, one-way street back that way. You know exactly what is going in, what's coming out. It just makes sense. The tests, then even just the naming of the tests are good, because this is the event. We're testing this event.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it makes testing, unit testing is obviously very easy because you've got these small components, but it even makes things like UI testing very easy, where you've got this simple, one input stream, one output stream. It's very easy to model for the UI, some kind of mock state and check how your UI responds. So yeah, that's a huge benefit. It always really interests me how many different approaches there are to MVI.
Yeah,
they differ wildly,
which
is super interesting. I was talking to Sam Edwards at Capital One a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling me about their MVI approach, which uses Kotlin actors, which would never have occurred to me, but is actually a really genius idea. There's and that really interests me as well, is that you can get pretty much the same results, but there's so many different approaches to it. So yeah, I think it makes a tremendous amount of sense.
Yeah, because the only thing that really means it's MVI is that you have events that you fire off and you have things that come back, and it's unidirectional data flow. That means it's MVI, really. So like whatever is in between firing off the event and observing the result is the black box, which could be any implementation you decide. So it's kind of like, there's a lot of different ways you could hook it up for sure.
Definitely, yeah. One of my main criticisms of MVI is it needs a far better name, because on Android it's deeply confusing.
They're all confusing though.
Couldn't be worse. So.
I think they're all confusing personally. They all, like, one's model will be not the same as another's model, and it's just, so it's like, I don't know. They don't really, any of them make sense, I think.
True. Yeah.
Or I don't know. They don't logically make sense together anyway.
No.
Yeah.
I feel like they just pick letters that sound good together.
Yeah. Like really.
Yeah. True.
How much time do you got, by the way? I didn't ask you at the beginning of this.
I mean, I've got plenty of time. It's absolutely fine.
Okay. I was planning on doing
6 p.m. here. So.
Okay. Usually we do about an hour, but I got some more questions for you if you got time.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I guess we talked about testing, we talked about MVI, which is what I wanted to talk about. What about like clean architecture? I think earlier I heard you mention something about swapping out. I think you said something about a domain layer, but you didn't specifically say domain, but it made me think domain. So do you guys use like clean architecture principles?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. So we do subscribe to the whole kind of having a separate domain layer and obviously kind of how you structure your app around that is pretty standard, where we've got a data layer that depends on the domain layer. Domains all pure Kotlin and that kind of thing, and then wire everything up with Dagger. Which may or may not be a controversial choice now, I'm not sure. But yeah, so that's the approach that we've chosen for better or for worse. I think it's definitely not perfect. I think I have some critiques of kind of clean architecture. I think you do end up generating a lot of boilerplate for the sake of it. And I think one danger with clean architecture is that people just kind of copy and paste what they've done elsewhere, copy paste implementations, without really thinking like, this has an interface, but do I really need an interface for it? Do I need this level of indirection? Like, why? Just kind of taking these kinds of things as gospel is maybe a little bit problematic. And I used to find it really interesting when I was at Blockchain. We used to have a sort of code challenge type project for new hires, potential new hires. And the clean architecture ones, they all turned out pretty much identical. And that, to me, the thing is, it doesn't really signal very much. It doesn't really tell you very much other than that they understand clean architecture. Yeah, it is more kind of like rote memorization versus actually thinking, what am I actually trying to solve with this interface? Why have we got this separate domain layer? What's the point in this repository? And that kind of thing. And I do occasionally resent having to, if I want to create a new use case which picks up some data that I hadn't previously exposed, I've got to edit sort of 10 files or that kind of thing, which seems a bit unnecessary. So yeah, I mean, we use it, and for the most part, I think it has a lot of benefits, and obviously the benefits are sort of testability and sort of separation of concerns. But I think adhering to it too rigidly is maybe a mistake. I think, don't take it as gospel, basically. I think consider what the problems are that you're trying to solve, and clean architecture is a tool to do that. But it doesn't mean that everything needs a use case and an interactor and then 3 interfaces between them and stuff like that. So
there's nuances, right?
What was that? Sorry.
There's nuances to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if you're just copy pasting boilerplate, then you're kind of losing that. So
yeah, there's definitely a lot of different implementations of clean architecture that I've seen, for sure, especially on Android. I've seen a lot of different ways to do it. When I built a course on it, I kind of came up with my own implementation that kind of made sense for Android, I thought, with like a focus on what are the things that I need to test. Those are definitely the things that need to have to rigidly sort of adhere to clean architecture, because you want to abstract out the things that you're looking to test. Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah, absolutely.
What else did I want to ask you? Kotlin or Java? That's pretty obvious. You like Kotlin. You told me that one already.
I mean, MVI would be pretty hard without Kotlin. So
yeah, you could use enums or something. I don't know. Maybe make it work.
The lack of lambdas or decent lambda support would be a bit killer. But yeah, losing sealed classes, no go. So.
So you're self-taught. Let's talk about that. What do you think is the best way to learn things? Because a lot of people who watch my channel are learning. What do you think is the most effective way to learn Android more specifically?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because Android right now is really kind of in a state of flux, and even I think really experienced developers, certainly I'll look for a solution for something, and the solution is 6 months out of date, a couple of years out of date. Android has changed so much that learning it right now, I think, would be tremendously difficult, because got the whole Java versus Kotlin question.
Flare coming in.
Yeah, so it's very difficult. I think. I mean, what worked for me when it was far simpler, because it was just Java, was I did a bunch of online courses. I think I did the very first Coursera course that Google sponsored, which was quite interesting. I think it had a heck of a learning curve, like a heck of a ramp up, where you went from like, here's an activity, here's how you like, here's an edit text and whatever, and then it was like content loaders, which was quite hard. That's always worked for me. I think the thing is, I think it's very difficult to kind of get it's very easy to get distracted in Android right now. I've always had a bit too much of a focus on kind of doing things the right way. And if you're kind of taking that approach when you're learning, and you're trying to do something super basic, and then it's like, oh, but this article says I should use a view model, and this article says I should be using Dagger, and this says I should be doing it in Kotlin, and there's this RxJava thing, but actually flows exist now, and you'll never get anywhere. And I think it's really, really important to kind of pick one problem at a time, basically. So it's totally okay to sit down and learn Java to like a competent level. And then once you kind of know Java's faults, then you move on to Kotlin, and then you gain an appreciation for, okay, so this is why people are using Kotlin, because it's much less verbose, and it's, you can do all these cool things. Get a basic UI working, and then try and rotate the device, and then discover, oh, actually everything's broken. And it's like, oh, okay, well, this is what a view model's for. I've heard about those. That's interesting. Now I can investigate those fully. And then suddenly, and then you think about testing, and then it's like, oh, actually DI is really important. Maybe I'll go down the DI rabbit hole. And suddenly you have an appreciation for why that works. So it's basically try and solve one problem at a time. And it's okay. A lot of people kind of try to understand everything in one go, and it's okay to take things at face value when you're learning such a massive topic. And it's okay to kind of just focus on that one thing that you're doing. Take some things as gospel for now. It's absolutely fine. And then once you kind of dig into it a bit further, then you realize, oh, these are the shortcomings. Suddenly, this other thing that I read about makes sense. And then you kind of branch out from there, and you kind of grow that knowledge tree. But yeah, I don't envy anyone who would be getting into Android right now. It's definitely difficult. There's definitely a lot to follow. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I said, just today I was Googling some specific problem and found something that was wildly out of date, and it's very frustrating. I think you've got to be very patient as well. So a developer patience helps.
That was well said. That might have been the best description I've heard yet. That was quite good.
Nice.
I might have to snip that and like post it on Instagram or something. That was pretty good. That was honestly great. It was it was the incremental it's like an incremental process. Yeah, don't worry about best practices, don't worry about anything. Just get in, try and build things, run into the problem, realize, okay, there's something that probably solves this problem. Yeah. Next step. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. Cool. And that's how you kind of build that foundational knowledge, and that's how you end up with an appreciation for why things are the way they are. So.
Yeah. And like, just as another thing to say too, it's probably quite important when you go to apply for jobs, like being able to tell the guy who's interviewing you why you use the view model, or why you use clean architecture, is probably far more important than being able to solve the clean architecture problem that they give you in the interview. They they want you to know the specific reason why you do those things.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. We don't really want people who just have memorized a specific solution to something. We want someone who, kind of understands what the problem is, and then why that solution solves it, and what the trade-offs are as well. And that's how you kind of, I think that's just how you should approach engineering in general, really. So,
so what are the things you look for? Like if a new hire or somebody interviewing comes in, what are the things that you ask in an interview now that you're a big lead?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because we're actually kind of completely overhauling our hiring process right now. So it's something that I haven't put a lot of thought into recently, but probably will in the next couple of weeks. Okay. But yeah, it's we're definitely looking for a certain amount of experience. We're looking for a certain amount of kind of understanding. how, like you said, kind of how these solutions solve these problems and what their kind of trade-offs are. Fine, like you might understand RxJava, but do you know why RxJava became popular, and that kind of thing? What problems does it solve? I think these days one of the things I really value is pragmatism. I think working in a kind of feature-focused company, we've done a lot of thinking very kind of purely about architecture, but I think having a sort of healthy dose of a kind of pragmatic approach to things, where we actually ship things, is quite important. I think that's something that I'm kind of valuing more and more, which is presumably a function of becoming a tech lead and being responsible for the team's output. So yeah, but no, it's a difficult one because I guess we've got a fairly good idea of the type of engineer that we want, but we're looking for kind of, because we've added another engineer recently, we've got another one coming. We're trying to think more about what's the kind of culture add that they can bring to the team. So we don't necessarily want a culture fit. We want somebody who brings something a little bit different, who can kind of integrate with the team, but adds a little bit of something as well. And for us, that means spending a couple of weeks thinking about what our weak spots are. What are we missing? What would we like to have an expert in join the team? Is that somebody who's very security focused? Is it somebody who's very good at animation? Is it somebody who's worked on a gigantic team and can tell us where our processes will fall apart in a year? So it's going to vary a lot, but that kind of core problem solving, I guess, that is obviously something that we try to optimize for. How we do that exactly is up for grabs in the next couple of weeks. So
yeah, that's a tricky one.
I was going to say in my previous role, I was lead there, and we came up with an interview process. I hate interviews, period, and I hate technical interviews. But one of the guys there had it was kind of like a pseudo code test that we started using on candidates, and that was really interesting because they're basically not allowed to use, like, they can write it in Kotlin if they want, but they're not allowed to write it in quote unquote Android or iOS. So you could apply it to all the different teams. And it was kind of giving them like a thought experiment. So I forget, I don't want to give a specific example away because I feel like I'm stealing, but it was kind of like, you imagine this scenario and then how do you build this? And then they have to do it, but they have to do it in pseudocode. So it doesn't have to compile, but you get to see how they think. And then you add something else in and be like, okay, but what happens in this situation? And I found that really useful because I ended up hiring at least one person that was a very bad fit for the company, but he passed the original test that they had, which was a really easy, like, here's a API. Can you make an API call with retrofit and show a list and all that kind of stuff? The thought experiments I thought were a really interesting way to try and go about it.
Yeah, I think, whichever way you approach it, interviewing engineers is definitely not a solved problem by any means. I think, almost every approach someone's not going to enjoy. Historically, I used to personally be a fan of the take-home tasks because I could spend as much time as I wanted to, and it's a lot more comfortable than, say, doing something algorithmic on a whiteboard, which I despise. But then, at some point, I ended up having like 5 different tasks on the go, and I was like, well, this is obviously insane. And then having been the person who is marking these tests as well, I feel like they don't actually tell you that much, depending on how you structure them. Certainly the ones, like you say, where you load something from an API and then display it, that's really the bare minimum that we would expect. So some kind of problem-solving task is really interesting. One of the things we're thinking about more and more is pair programming. Because of the pandemic and everyone's working from home, pair programming is something which we're doing a little bit more than we used to, and the tools for it are pretty good these days. So that to me seems like a bit of a no-brainer, and I think, probably one of the best processes that I've done was sitting in a room with someone, and the question was, like, you have an hour, build a trading system, and you have to be able to represent prices at a certain given point in time, and you have to be able to get the total of someone's portfolio, and their total amount of cash is different to their actual investments and stuff like this. And then, once they're getting to a solution, you can change it slightly and say, okay, well, what about this? Have you thought about multiple users accessing the same account or something like that? But sitting down with someone actually pairing with them gives you far more insight into how they think, and also just what they're like as a person, because you've got to work with this person every day. So yeah, I think it's certainly something we're considering. The downside is it takes up a lot of our time. So I don't know how well that scales necessarily. And I think certainly I wouldn't want to be the only person on the team doing those interviews. I think everyone would have to be trained on them, ideally, or we'd have to be better at screening them initially. But I think that's a really good approach. Yeah, giving something that's a bit more freeform, a bit less Android focused, ideally.
Yeah. So. It also gives the added advantage that you could get someone from a different team to sit in with you, because then you get a more objective view as well. It's like the iOS guy can sit in and they can say, I think they're good, without having specifically to know knowledge about Android and stuff like that. But there's loads of different ways to do it. I haven't seen one that I think is perfect yet. Yeah, no, definitely. Like I said, it's not a solved problem by any means, and plenty of people have written a ton of stuff about the shortcomings. And I'm leaning more and more towards pair programming as being one of the better solutions. So.
Pair programming sounds like the middle ground. Like you have the algorithmic tests, which are the fastest, but also probably the most vague, and then you have the take-home tests, which, I mean, arguably they, depending on the way the test is designed, could tell you the most about the candidate, but they occupy a massive amount of time. And then you have the middle, which could be these sort of pair programming tests where they're fairly efficient, but you also get to see a lot of what they're all about. I don't know.
Yeah. The only downside with that is that people who have the kind of performance anxiety aspect are not going to enjoy that very much. Which is a shame. But I do think it probably gives you the most signals. I think of all the interviews that I've conducted, they've been the one with the most signals for sure. So.
Cool. So you got some stuff to think about coming up. Some hiring processes.
It's quite a lot to do coming up between onboarding and then working out who we're going to hire next, and what we want and stuff like that. So busy.
Do you have any? So speaking of time management, do you have any time management skills that you kind of use in your day to day, or you just kind of take it as it comes?
It's definitely something I could be better at. And I was actually having this discussion with the lead iOS engineer today. We're talking about having blocks of time to work in and kind of do that deep work. And he was saying, what's the minimum amount of time you think that you need sort of uninterrupted to kind of do some deep work? And I was thinking like 3 hours is about right for actually getting something done. And quite often that's really not possible. What I've been doing, so since becoming a lead, I use Todoist a lot. I find it's really good to keep a list of everything that I need to do. So at the end of the day, I'll write down everything which I have got outstanding, so I can come back to it in the morning. I find that I tend to wake up really early, and I'll get stuff done in the morning before stand up. That works for me as well, because it's just when I'm not interrupted. And kind of aggressively moving meetings around where you can. It's okay to be that guy who's a bit of a pain in the butt and rescheduling things if it allows you to do the work that's asked of you. So we do something at Cuvva, which is we have a no meetings Wednesday, which is the best day of the week, and that's been really advantageous for all of us, I think. So that helps as well. Even if I am snowed under because of meetings or that kind of thing, then that is my little sanctuary. And the other thing that I've been doing recently as well, which has worked quite well, is if I've got, say, an hour between meetings and it's not quite enough to do some greenfield, like new feature work where I have to really think about the problem that I'm solving, it's really good for just tackling outstanding bugs or doing what we call discipline work, technical discipline work, which might be refactoring a module from Android to pure Kotlin or something like that, something which doesn't take that much thinking about and is kind of a chore. But at least you can feel like you're being productive in these, if you haven't got full control over that calendar, there's plenty of sort of backloggy things that you can do in that time, where if you have to drop it for some reason and come back to it the next day, you're not going to be like, what the hell was I thinking? Where was my train of thought?
Yeah.
What was the actual problem that I was solving? And that's worked really well for me as well. So it allows me to kind of be productive between meetings. But it is an endless struggle, and it's something that I struggle with as a freshly minted team lead. It's definitely one of the big things you kind of have to overcome, and kind of come up with your own process. But that's kind of worked for me.
Sounds like some good strategies there. Like I like I do that also. Like you keep a list of sort of, I call them mindless tasks, even though they're not like completely mindless, but they're like tasks that don't like really strain your brain. Like you said, if something happens to happen, like I can just save, walk away, come back, and like it's not a big deal. Like I can come back and do that same task. You keep you keep a list of these tasks, and then if you happen to be between time, you're like, oh, let's take a look at my old dummy list or like whatever, and I just like cross a couple off, and that's definitely seems to be an effective
pretty much
way.
Yeah. No, I've got the same thing at the moment. I'm maintaining a list of modules which I know are currently Android but could be Kotlin if I just tweak them a bit, and I've got a list of which order they need to be migrated in because of the dependencies, and that's worked quite well so far. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, do you have any final questions for Mr. Bennett here?
No final questions from me. The only thing I would say is one comment, which is Cuvva sounds very much like the last place that I worked, which was a very good experience. So I imagine your hiring will go well. Yeah.
I mean, I hope so. I mean, we're going to reopen hiring in December, I think. So only a few weeks away. But when I left my previous job, I was really looking for somewhere with a very, very healthy culture. That was the thing that I prioritized over everything else. And Cuvva certainly seems to have that in terms of, in terms of a kind of people culture, it's fantastic. And in terms of an engineering culture on the Android team, we've been very careful and very deliberate about that culture. And I'm really enjoying it personally, and I hope everyone else on the team is as well. But hopefully it scales well. That's the main thing.
Yeah. No, well, sounds good.
Thanks for coming on, and good luck with everything that you have coming up, including your hiring, which I definitely would have some anxiety over myself. So I wish you luck, sir. And thanks again for coming on. It was really good. I think this was a great podcast. A lot of really good, very detailed Android stuff we talked about. So thanks again.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me.
Okay. All right. We'll see you next time.